Hi guys, welcome to another Keyshot tutorial. My name's Liam Martin, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a fully procedural recycled plastic material in Keyshot. This material consists of two main parts. The first one is a cloudy plastic resin material, and the second is plastic, or there could be any material you want, but plastic, in this case, flakes that sit underneath the surface of the material. I was actually inspired to make this recycled material after reading an article about design. The article was featuring EcoBird's recycled plastic toys and furniture, which I thought were fantastic. So I thought I'd try and create a similar material in Keyshot. Now my material doesn't look exactly the same as theirs. I'm sure you could tune it to match theirs if you wanted to. But there's a lot of room for play with this, including how transparent you want that material to be, how big you want the flakes to be, etc. Now before we get into the tutorial, I've got a couple of disclaimers to go through. Number one is that we'll be using a cloudy plastic material type in Keyshot. This takes quite a bit longer to render out than its normal plastic counterparts, and that's because of the subsurface scattering that occurs within that material. And secondly, to add insult to injury, I'm having a lot of difficulties rendering this recycled plastic material on my GPU. Now I've read into the forums a little bit about this, and I think it's because the cloudy plastic relies on ray tracing with an RTX card, and that might be an issue with the latest NVIDIA drivers. The other issue is that we've got flakes sitting underneath the surface, and I think it's just having some difficulties calculating what to do with that light. So I've decided to ditch GPU rendering for this, so the tutorial is going to go a little bit slower. If you do manage to get GPU rendering with your material, let me know down in the comments. I want to see how GPU rendering is working out for you. Obviously we're still quite new for GPU, so we're still expecting these teething issues, but hopefully it all gets resolved soon. If you're not subscribed already, please hit that subscribe button before we get started so you don't miss out on any future Keyshot content. I'm going to try to get a video out every week. If not, at best, I'll try and do a video every fortnight. So expect a lot of videos coming in 2020. Otherwise, let's get started with the tutorial. Okay, so this is the scene we're going to be working on for today's tutorial, featuring a model I made of Microsoft Surface headphones. And we're going to be applying our recycled plastic material onto this ear cup, and in fact the other ear cup on the other side that we can't really see in frame at the moment. The first thing I want to do is talk about the geometry that you need and how to organize your scene to make this process a little bit easier, as we're going to be using two different materials combined together to create the overall effect of the recycled plastic. So first thing I've done is left my left ear body and right ear body out of any other folder. I'm going to select both of them, right click, add to group, and then in my Surface headphones folder, so the overall folder for the product, I'm going to call that plastic cloudy, and then okay to add those to the group. It's okay changing the scene hierarchy, so just okay that. And then I'm going to right click and duplicate that folder to make another copy of those two parts. So any parts that you want to apply the material to, put them into a group and then duplicate that group. And I'm going to call this new group plastic flakes. Okay, we don't want to move them, we want to keep them in exactly the same place, so just hit tick on that new move tool. The next thing is to discuss the geometry that you're going to need to do this. Now I know a lot of people model with surfaces, and that's not going to work for this really, because we need a solid container to actually hold the flakes and to have that translucent material. So if I right click and go to split separate objects just to show you what's happening with this geometry, you'll see that it's a complete solid shell, okay, that's going to hold this material. So if you're working with surfaces, you might have issues with this. I'm not sure how things work as a container when you're working in surface modeling. So that's what you want for this. I realize this isn't accurate for the body of a headphone, but we'll just go with it anyway. Okay, so now we can start throwing some materials onto these different parts. So the first one I'm going to throw on is a hard shiny plastic. I'm just going to go with red for now and drag that over to the plastic flakes folder to apply it to those two parts there. Then I'm going to search for white cloudy, and that will bring up the plastic cloudy rough white 3mm, and then I'm going to apply that to the plastic cloudy folder there to apply that to the two parts that are in there, the left ear body and the right ear body. Okay, so let's start off by editing the flakes first. Let's just hide the plastic cloudy folder, and I'll double click on one of the parts here and jump straight into the graph. So we're going to be using flakes here, the flakes tool in Keyshot, which is going to allow us to take this solid geometry, this solid block of plastic, and generate flakes within that. I've used it in the past to create things like falling rain and floating dust in Keyshot. It's quite a handy little tool, and it's going to work really well here to generate little shards of plastic that are going to sit beneath the surface of our material. Once you're in the material graph, you need to right click, go to geometry and then flakes, and then plug the output of flakes into the geometry input on the root node. Once you've done that, you can double click on flakes to bring up some options for it. So the first option is the size of your flakes. This is going to depend on the bit of furniture, depend on the product that you're actually using the material on. My product is quite small, so I'm going to need small flakes. If you're doing furniture, you might need larger flakes. So in my case, I'm going to go for 0.6 on the size. I'm going to bump my size variation up to 1, so they're not all uniformly the same size. Density, I'm going to go for 1 for now. We'll see how that works out. And my flake limit, I'm going to bring up to 2. That's 2 million maximum flakes that I can have in Keyshot. Each flake is going to be made up of 2 triangles. So depending on how much memory you've got on your system, you should be fine to have quite a high flake limit. And we won't be touching this limit basically in this tutorial. And then I can hit execute geometry node, and you'll see when I click execute, I'll just move the material graph out the way a little bit, that it turns that solid into little flakes. Okay, it fills that container with flakes. It's up to you how many flakes you want to put under the surface. For me, I want to fill it out a little bit more, so I'm going to bump my density up to 1.5, and when I've made that change, I need to hit execute geometry node again to actually make those changes. So now you can see we've got a more full container full of little shards of plastic under there. Now on this note, it can only generate flakes if the flakes are going to fall within that container. So sometimes I've had larger flakes, and even though my flake limit has been 1 million or so, and my density's been quite high, it's only generated a few flakes in there. So play around with the settings until it fills that container nicely. Okay, now we want to make sure that we've got some different colors in here. So the best option for this would be to actually have multiple flakes containers with different flakes materials on there. But for me, I'm just going to use a procedural texture to change the color of them. And that procedural texture we're going to use is camouflage. So right click, go to textures and then camouflage. I've never used camouflage for anything else, but it works fairly well for this. And then hit C on the keyboard to preview your camouflage. Okay, so we've got 4 colors to choose from, and we can change some of the settings for it as well. This is procedural, so it's internal, it's built into Keyshot. Scale first, I want to match the scale of my flakes. So I went for 0.6 on the flakes. I'll go for 0.6 here. Bump height we don't need, and color balance we'll look at in a second, and distortions at 1, which is fine. We can introduce a little bit of spray so that they're not perfectly sharp edges, but that's up to you. I'm just going to go for 0.5-ish on the spray. And now we can start to look at the colors. So I would encourage you to be quite out there with the colors of the flakes. But just remember, this is a recycled plastic, and when you get recycled materials, you're not really going to sort through them that much. So having specific color schemes can be quite difficult. So I do recommend that you put some other colors in there. The majority of mine, I'm going to go with beige. So for my color 1, I'm just going to go for a beige here, which I'm actually going to say is basically white, because white in real life is not pure white in Keyshot. And then for my color 2, I'm going to have as a darker beige. Okay, so I'm going to have that as orange and a bit more saturated. We'll go back there. And now for my color 3, I'm going to put more color in there. So I'm going to go nearly full saturation, not quite, and start off with a burnt orange. We'll go about there. Bit more on the saturation. And then for my color 4, I'm going to go for the same sort of saturation, not quite full saturation, and go for a lighter orange, close to a yellow. Okay, when you do that, you'll see that the camouflage color changes in the preview there, and then you can hit C on the keyboard to come out of that preview, and then we want to plug this into the diffuse of the plastic. Now, this is quite a bodgy way to do things, but there's nothing wrong with that. Because they're underneath the surface, we're not going to see most of them, and this is a great quick way to generate flakes in different colors. At this point, I'm going to play around with the color balance, and the higher I go with color balance, the more of these second two colors I'm going to see. So if I go second block of colors, my orange and yellow I'm going to see. So if I bump up my color balance to 3, okay, we're going to get more of that orange and yellow, and I think that's probably about right for what I want to create. Of course, play around with the settings and find something that's suitable for you. Okay, so that's the flakes done, and I'm now going to move on to editing the translucent plastic material. So I can close down the material graph for the flakes, go back to my scene tree, and unhide the plastic cloudy folder. And when you do that, you'll see that we now have flakes underneath the surface of our cloudy plastic, and it's already looking fairly convincing. Okay, so at this point you can actually click onto your, double click your plastic cloudy rough white 3mm material, and we'll discuss some of the settings here. So first is the transmission, which is essentially the color of the material. This is controlled by two things: the first, the transmission, and then the cloudiness color. So I'm just going to start with my transmission as white. My transparency distance we'll come back to in a second. Straight off the bat, I'm going to bump up my cloudiness to 1. Okay, I want this to be quite a cloudy material. Refractive index we can say keep at 1.5, sorry. And roughness we're going to change with a map. So at this point, I'm going to bump up my transparency distance. Now I bumped up our cloudiness. I'm going to go for 500mm, and that should mean that we start to see some of the flakes underneath the surface, but only the ones closest to the top of that surface. And now we'll go down to cloudiness color, and I'm also going to change that up to white. Now when you do that, you'll see that it ends up more cloudy. So to compensate for that, I'm going to bump up my transparency distance to 750mm. And in this, I'm not going to talk about the last two settings for cloudiness color because I really don't think we need them for this material. Okay, so at this point, we're happy with the basic material. We can come back and change the colors later. I'll show you an easy way to do that. But we'll jump into the material graph and start to talk through some of the settings here. So first thing we want to do is add a roughness map to this so it's not so uniform over the top. This is a recycled material. There's going to be lots of variation in there, and we want it to look scruffy. So let's right click, go to textures, and add in a granite node. I found the granite to be really good for doing procedural roughness maps. So if I hit C on the keyboard to preview granite, you'll see that it's just a wash of this color and then darker regions, okay? You don't have much choice over it, but for a roughness map, it's fine. So let's start off by changing the color to 1, so we have lots of contrast in there, darker regions and lighter regions. And then I'm gonna bring down my scale to 90. Now, if you've got a larger product, you might wanna go a little bit higher on this, but I wanna actually see the glossier and rougher parts of the plastic over the ear cup, and that's fine. So at this point we can plug this granite node into the roughness of this cloudy plastic. So take the output and drag it over to this little plus symbol and then select roughness. At that point you'll see it go very rough, and that's because we need to change some of the outputs in here. So I'm going to right click on this connecting blue line, go to utilities and add in a color to number node, and then hit C on the keyboard to preview the color to number. So our roughness originally was 0.1, and I think that worked fairly well for the overall roughness of the material, so we're going to aim for something around that. So my output 2, which is my highest value, which is white on here, maximum roughness of 1, I'm going to bring that down to 0.1, the 0.1 that we originally had, and I'm going to bring up the output from to somewhere between 0.05 and 0.8. So let's go to 0.06. You'll see that pushes the two values very, very close together. So we've only got 0.04 of difference. Now 0.04 of roughness at the bottom end of the scale, it's actually quite a lot of difference. So you should see quite a change as you move lights over the surface of this material, okay? Really adds to the realism. At this point, I can click on color to number and hit C on the keyboard to exit that, and we can move on to the next step. So the next thing we're going to do is overlay a plastic material on top of this to add more manufacturing defects to the material. At this point, I'm going to have to zoom in a little bit, but I'll start it off first. So I'm going to right click, go to materials and add in a plastic. So I'm going to plug the output of this plastic material as a label into the root node. So that will overlay the plastic over the whole ear cup. Don't worry, we're going to change that in a second. And I'm going to control the opacity of this plastic with spots. So I'm going to right click, go textures and add in a spots module. And then hit C on the keyboard to preview that. So let's go to camera. I'll go back to my free camera, zoom in a bit and turn on depth of field. So some of the settings in here, we want to make the spot scale very, very small. So I'm going to go for 0.15 on the spot scale. Okay, that's going to make the spots very, very tiny. Remember to hit C on the keyboard to preview spots. We need to flip the color around. So the color of the spots I'm going to have as white and the background as black. Then I'm going to bump up my density quite far. I'm going to go density of 10 and radius I'm going to bump up to 0.6. And then distortion I'm going to have as 1. And that should be fine. I don't think we need to increase the fall off. I think 0.1 will be fine. So we're then going to plug this spots into the opacity input of the plastic. So anything that was white on here is going to be fully opaque in this plastic. And you can now see that the only bits where there were white spots, that plastic is fully opaque. But I don't want to stop there. I actually want to make it so not all the spots are the same opacity. Okay, so we're adding more variety in there as well, more defects, less uniformity. And I'm going to do that with another procedural texture, which is cellular. So I'm going to right click, go to textures and add in a cellular node. Cellular is similar to granite, but you get a little bit more control. So with cellular, what I'm going to do is bring the scale down to around 1.7, okay, quite small. Again, if you've got a larger product, you might want to go a little bit higher on the scale. Color 1, I'm going to leave as black, and color 2, I'm going to bring down to a, let's go 60% gray and see how that works out. Okay, and then at this point we can introduce a little bit more noise. And I don't think we need to do any on levels. Now let's leave levels. But we can turn the shape down. So I'm going to bring the shape down to around 0.2. Okay, so that's our output from cellular. And I want to plug that in to the color of the spots. So take the output of cellular and plug that into the color of the spots. And now if I preview the spots, you'll see that we've still got the spot pattern there, but we've got patches of darker grays and a bit of black in there as well. So this plastic is not going to be completely opaque all the way through. Okay, if I hit Control, Shift and R on my keyboard to focus into a smaller region of this, we're quite close up to this material now. And like I said, it's going to take a little bit longer to render. So use good workflow tips where you can to make the process a little bit easier. That's looking pretty good. I might actually go a little bit higher on the opacity. So I'm going to go back to my cellular. Color 2, I'm going to bring up. And let's go for a 75% instead. About right. No, go a little bit lower. Let's go 70. That'll be fine. Again, you can know all these settings. You can come and play around with them and find what works best for you. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to go back to my headphones camera. And I'll Control Shift R to come out of my preview, and I'm going to show you how to control all of this color wise with one texture. In fact, I've missed a step out, so first thing we need to do is actually use this spots for bump. So I'm going to click and drag the output of the spots into the bump of the plastic label and into the bump of the cloudy plastic, and then double click on spots and increase the bump height to 0.2. So that's going to add a little bit of texture to those spots again, more manufacturing defects over the top of the material. So I'll get back to it now. So changing the color of the overall material with one node. So I'm going to right click, go to utilities and add in a color composite. Now if you don't change any settings and just leave that, it's basically outputting the source color. So we'll change our source color to white. We had the cloudiness color, transmission and diffuse of this plastic as white, so we can do that. So I'll drag the output of color composite to transmission, drag the output to this little plus symbol on the cloudy plastic and have that as cloudiness color, and then drag it to the diffuse of this plastic down here. And now if we change the source color in the color composite, it will change all three of those, and we'll get the overall color of that translucent plastic changed with one node. So that makes things a little bit easier for your workflow. and ties everything together quite nicely. I'm just going to change it back to white because I thought that's what looked best for this scene and for my material anyway. But that does it for the tutorial. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and hopefully it wasn't too complicated. It's multi-step material, so we actually needed 2 geometries, which is a new thing for this channel at least. But I hope you got something for it. Please like the video, get subscribed if you haven't done already. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments section down below. And of course, if you post this on Instagram, if you do any renders using this material, please remember to tag me at @LDMartin so I don't miss out on any of your work. For now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.